Well, good morning. Here we are, February, still the 14th. Happy Valentine's Day. We are looking at chapter 6, verses 1 through 11, and the title of it is Reigns. Reigns, R-E-I-G-N-S. According to the dictionary, it means to hold power, to sit on the throne, and to wear the crown. And of course, we know Jesus does all three. It says that Jesus prioritizes meeting people's needs over keeping rituals. Rituals, that's an interesting concept or idea. But what we're going to talk about is the traditions that the Jewish spiritual leaders observed. They weren't the laws according to Moses. They were traditions that are set up. It says that there is over, let's see, the Mishnah was a collection of rabbi teachings that were not part of the scriptures and included nearly 40 specific prohibitions related to the activities on the Sabbath. So here we are. Moses and God, or God and Moses, however, set all this up, the rules and regulations that he wanted the Israelites to follow. Well, over time, the rabbis have taken it upon themselves to add to this. And they were so strict about it that they've gone from being traditions to actually being enforceable rules applied to the Jewish people. And Jesus was trying to get past that. He wanted them to understand that people themselves were more important than traditions. So as we look at verses 1 and 2 of Luke 6, it's talk work on the Sabbath. On the Sabbath, he passed through the grain fields. His disciples were picking heads of grain, rubbing them in their hands and eating them. But some of the Pharisees said, "Why are you doing what is not lawful on the Sabbath?" Now, in Deuteronomy 23, verses 24 and 25, it talks about this to an extent. And it says, "You may eat your fill of grapes from your neighbor's vineyard, but you may not take any away in a basket. And you may pick a few heads of your neighbor's grain by hand, but you are not to harvest it with a sickle." And so what this says in Deuteronomy is that they could partake of your neighbor's vineyards or your grain as long as they weren't taking an abundance of it, not actually working and cutting it down. Now the Sabbath was, of course, the holy day. Let me read to you what it says in chapter 20, verses 8 through 11, concerning the 10 Commandments. It says, "Remember to observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days a week are set apart for your daily duties and regular work, but the seventh day is a day of rest dedicated to the Lord your God. On that day, no one in your household may do any kind of work. This includes you, your sons and daughters, your male and female servants, your livestock, and any foreigners living among you. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens, the earth, and the sea, and everything in them. Then he rested on the seventh day. That is why the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and set it apart for being holy." So the Sabbath was set apart by God and is part of the tradition, not tradition, but it is part of the covenant that God placed between him and the Israelite people to observe. He rested on the seventh day. They were too. And the only exception to that was if there was someone a male child due to be circumcised, and the circumcision date fell on the Sabbath, they could do it then. Or if somebody's life was in danger, they could go out and save that person, rescue that person from sure death. Now, on over in Exodus 31, it talks about instructions for the Sabbath. And we think about how strict the Pharisees, through their traditions, had made the Sabbath. But according to the scripture, it says in verse 12 through 14 in Exodus 31, it says, the Lord then gave these further instructions to Moses. Tell the people of Israel to keep my Sabbath day, for the Sabbath is a sign of the covenant between me and you forever. It helps you to remember that I am the Lord who makes you holy. Yes, keep the Sabbath day, for it is holy. Anyone who desecrates it must die. Anyone who works on that day will be cut off from the community. So it was severe penalties. It could lead up to death for someone who desecrated the Sabbath day, went against what God had pronounced for them to do, and that was to rest. And so what we have here, whether the Pharisees were walking along with Jesus and his disciples, they just happened to be there, we don't know. But the Pharisees saw him. Now, we got into last week how the Pharisees right then started to plot against Jesus because he'd healed the lame man on the pallet. Remember, that was lowered down through the roof of the house. And so this kind of went against him. Even though it wasn't on the Sabbath, still, Jesus was encroaching upon their territory as being the spiritual leaders of the nation. They pretty well had it made. And Jesus was showing them up. So, in verse 1 and 2, it said that Jesus and his disciples were walking through a grain field. Now, the grain fields were not fenced in. They were out there, and usually there was paths to walk through because a lot of people went from point A to point B, and the nearest direct way was through the grain fields. And usually there were paths there. But as they went, they were picking a few heads of grain, rubbing it in their hands to separate the heads of grain from the chaff, and then getting rid of it. Well, the Pharisees saw this and said, why are you doing what is not lawful on the Sabbath? They were accusing them of actually reaping the grain and separating the sheaves from the grain heads, winnowing it. And they said, hey, that's work. Well, you know, they're trying to put Jesus and his disciples under a spotlight because they were looking for things to nail Jesus on. And the thing is, if you notice here, the Pharisees basically addressed his disciples. They didn't address Jesus directly. They went to the disciples. That was the same last week or 2 weeks ago when Jesus chose Levi or Matthew to follow him. And they got upset and said something to the Jesus' disciples about, why are you eating and drinking with these sinners? They never, now they probably at some occasions did, but right offhand I can't think of any. But usually they didn't address Jesus directly. I guess they were afraid to be showed up. I don't know. But anyway, here they are nitpicking Jesus' disciples about, you are working on the Sabbath. You're breaking the Sabbath rule, which is ridiculous. And so they're trying to get things on Jesus and disciples because what the disciples did reflected upon Jesus. Now, this was true with any rabbi or teacher. Their fellowship, their disciples, they did something wrong or something good, it was a direct reflection upon the teacher. And so this was a direct reflection upon Jesus through his disciples, but they weren't doing anything wrong. And so here they are, they're looking past the need of these disciples. Evidently they were hungry. I mean, I'd have to be hungry if I went to the trouble to pick some heads of grain up and rub it through against my hands to separate the stuff and then eat the grains. I'd have to be pretty hungry. But they were looking at that, not at the need of the person, but at the rule and regulation that they were breaking in the Pharisees' eyes. It was not a Mosaic law, but it was the Jewish tradition that they were so upset about. And so, you know, the thing is about traditions. There's a lot of denominations that have set traditions that they follow every service. I mean, there's a certain routine, if you would. And we Baptists are, we do that too. We may not think it's a routine or a tradition, but it is when we go in and we do this first and that first, and then this and then that every Sunday. There's a great saying among us Baptists: we've never done it that way before. That means we don't change. We're set in this routine and this rut. That's the way it's got to be. Well, it doesn't. The routines or the traditions that's set up doesn't bring you into a worshipful state. It's a person on God thing. It's how you worship. If you want an outline of the service to see what's coming next, that's fine. But, you know, these things that we do Sunday to Sunday is not written in stone. It can be adjusted to. And we at Exchange have had to adjust things. We used to have choirs, and we used to have special music for each preaching. Sometimes we'd have announcements before all the preaching and singing. Sometimes we'd have it afterwards. It was, done step by step. Was it wrong? No. But we've had to adjust because of the circumstances within our church, such as people, leaving, change of staff and stuff. But you can still worship. You can still have the old gospels. You can still have the newer music. But it's the state of heart and mind that makes it a worshiping experience. And so they were all upset about what the disciples were doing. And they were looking past the personal needs that the disciples were fulfilling and looking at, well, that's not what you're supposed to do. Now, let's look at the second part, Lord of the Sabbath. This is Luke 6, verses 3 through 5. Jesus answered them, haven't you read what David and those who were with him did when he was hungry? How he entered the house of God and took and ate the bread of the presence, which is not lawful for any but the priest to eat. He even gave some to those who were with him. Then he told them, the Son of Man is the Lord of the Sabbath. Okay. Well, Jesus is stepping on toes now. He was reminding the Pharisees, who were very well acquainted with the story of David. I mean, after all, he was one of the greatest leaders of all time in the Jewish nation. What this is taking place is when David was on the run from Saul, escaping with him and some of his men, running for their lives. And they come up to this temple in the town of Nod, N-O-B, Nod. And Amalek was the priest there. Well, he presents to Amalek, David has his men wait outside the temple, and he goes on in and explains to Amalek that his men and he are on a secret mission, and time is of the essence, and they are hungry. Now, this bread of the presence, or the showbread, it was baked every Sunday, 12 loaves, one loaf to represent each of the 12 tribes, and given to the Lord in dedication. And when this bread was replaced with fresh loaves, this bread was available only to the priest to eat. But David, not actually lying to Amalek, saying that he was sent by the king, he was just saying he was on a special mission and he needed food. And he only asked for 5 loaves, but Amalek gave David all 12 loaves. And so this is what Jesus is referring to. Do you remember the time that David was hungry, he and his men, and they took the bread that was dedicated to God and ate it out of necessity because they were hungry. And he's making them recall to mind there was a situation here that superseded the tradition and the rituals of the Jewish worship time, that man's need superseded that. It overtook it. It overshadowed it. It was more important for these men have their needs met than to follow the idea that, well, this bread is only for the priest to eat. And so Jesus is bringing this up to him. And the thing is, you remember last week? Yeah, I think it was last week, where he talked about the Son of Man. He called himself the Son of Man. Remember, we talked last week about how he used this term, and it designated both his humanity and his messianic designation. And he said, and then he told them, and Jesus talking to the priest, the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. And so last week he said, the Son of Man is able to forgive sins, which means that he was on equal ground with God. Remember, the Pharisees, only God can forgive sins? Well, they were right. Only Jesus and God could forgive sins because Jesus was God. Now he's saying the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. You know, he's saying that he's claiming to be the Lord of Sabbath, which in itself asserts his position to be that equal of God. He's basically saying that I am God. I'm able to do this because I designated the Sabbath. I am of God. And so what he's doing is clarifying the idea of, like I said, is that Jesus was more interested in meeting the needs of people than following any traditions that were set up by man to be followed. A person's life was more important than written down instructions of how to worship, when to worship, what to do on Sunday. And that just went all against the Pharisees and the scribes. That's not what they were taught. That's not what they teach. But if you look at it, it's the truth. Now the next part is do good on the Sabbath. Now, it's strange, the first part of it was them going through the grain fields on a Sabbath. Whether they were going through the grain fields on the way to the temple, or this is after, but it's on the Sabbath again. Now this is on the Sabbath, do good on the Sabbath. Luke made references to kind of keep us in touch with that Jesus did things on the Sabbath or he did things during the week. And the idea of one or the other was more important of what he did during this time. And it was reaching and touching people. Maybe not physically touching them, but spiritually touching them. This is what Jesus was about. Remember we said, I didn't come to heal the healthy. I come to heal the sick, those in need. And that's what he's doing. Now, do good on the Sabbath. This is Luke 6, verses 6 through 11. Verses 6 and 7. On another Sabbath, he entered the synagogue and was teaching. A man was there whose hand was shriveled. The scribes and Pharisees were watching him closely to see if he would heal on the Sabbath so they could find a charge against him. Verse 8 and 9. But he knew their thoughts, and he told the man with the shriveled hand, "Get up and stand here." So he got up and stood there. Then Jesus asked them, basically directing this idea to the Pharisees, but to everyone in the congregation. "I ask you, is it lawful to do good on the Sabbath, or to do evil, to save life, or to destroy it?" Verse 10 and 11. After looking around at them all, he told him, the man with the shriveled hand, "Stretch out your hand." He did, and his hand was restored. They, the Pharisees, however, were filled with rage and started discussing with one another what they might do to Jesus. All right, let's go back. Doing good on the Sabbath. So here he is again in the synagogue, and he's teaching. Now, evidently, even though the Pharisees were after him and hounded him, he had a good rapport with the rabbis of the temple, because here he was teaching again. So he had access to this. But the Pharisees were there. And look at this. It says, a man was there whose hand was shriveled. Evidently, this was the man's home temple, probably from that area, if not that town. And people knew who he was. They knew he had the shriveled hand. It was well known. And so, whether the scribes and the Pharisees knew that, we don't know. It's alluded to the fact in one of the quarterlies that this might have even been a setup by the Pharisees to have this man present. Why? The scribes and the Pharisees were watching Jesus closely to see if he would heal on the Sabbath so they could find a charge against him. Think of that. They weren't there to be enlightened. They weren't there to listen to Jesus, to learn from him. They're hoping that he would do something on the Sabbath that was not in the tradition that they had known and gone by. And that's all they were there for. The other people were there to hear Jesus. Here the Pharisees and the scribes were just laying in wait like vultures, waiting for him to do something that they could pin on him, to charge him with blasphemy. And so what's it say in 8 and 9? But he knew their thoughts. Think of that. We read last week where Jesus knew their thoughts. Jesus had insight to each and every person's heart and mind. I firmly believe that. He knew what they were going to say before they said it. And the same thing here. He knew their thoughts, and he told the man with a shriveled hand, "Get up and stand here." Now, whether the guy was close in or not, we don't know. But Jesus designated that man to get up and stand in front of Jesus, in front of all the congregation, the Pharisees and the scribes together. And so he got up. Now, this had to show some faith on the man with the shriveled hand, obeying Jesus. Just got up and stood there. To me, the faith that he had in Jesus telling him to do that, yes, I'll follow what you tell me to do. And so he gets up and he stands there and he's facing this congregation. He's facing those who are friends of this man, who knew him, and were waiting to see what Jesus would do. And then we had the Pharisees and scribes waiting to see what Jesus would do. But just the attitudes of the groups, his neighbors and friends and the Pharisees, the difference there was and the reason why they were watching Jesus. And so Jesus asked them, is it lawful to do good on the Sabbath or to do evil, to save life or destroy it? Now, of course it's good to do good on the Sabbath. What better day would it be on the Lord's Day than to do something special in the name of God? And it said to save life or destroy it. Well, that was part of the exception to the rule on Sabbath, that if a person's life was in danger, he could be saved or rescued. Now, this person was not in dire danger. His life was not in peril. It was just his hand. Just his hand. It's kind of simplifying it. If it was my hand, it wouldn't be just my hand. But the idea that it was enough for Jesus to have compassion on this man and to show everyone, including the Pharisees and the scribes, that there is a time for good to be done anytime there is, regardless of what day of the week it is. No, this man wasn't in danger. But God, or Jesus, wanted to prove a point that an individual person's need goes above any written law or tradition. And so it says, after looking around at them, and Jesus just was gazing at everybody, he told the man to stretch out his hand. And he did. He obeyed Jesus. And when he did, his hand was restored. Think of that. Think of the miracle being seen there. Jesus didn't lay his hand on him. He didn't, pray over him. Jesus just, in his mind, said, your hand will be healed. And when he told the man, stretch out your hand, the man in faith did that, and his hand was restored. That's awesome. And you can imagine his friends and neighbors that knew him. They had to be happy for him. It doesn't say, but they had to be rejoicing, let alone the man himself. But what's it say? They, the Pharisees, were filled with rage. Now, rage is basically that they've lost their minds. Their anger was so great that they started to lose control. Think of that. Instead of rejoicing in something that God did through Jesus, healing a crippled hand, a shriveled hand, to be able to use again, to make this person whole again, they were angry about it. Basically because they had been put down and put in their place. They wouldn't have done it because it went against the rules. But there's no rules when it comes to Jesus and a person's need. It's what Jesus feels the need to do at that time with that person. And it says, so however they were filled with rage and started discussing with one another what they might do to Jesus. That's all they could think of. No happiness for the man, no rejoicing. They were just upset because Jesus showed them up. You notice they didn't answer, is it good to do lawful on the Sabbath or do evil? Well, it's good to do, it's lawful to do good. To save a life or destroy it? Well, to save a life. And this is all Jesus did, was do good on the Sabbath. But they were afraid to speak up. Because basically, if they, let me read it here, it says, I'm sorry, I can't find it right now. But the idea is that whatever they answered would have been wrong in their heart and mind. They wanted to trap Jesus. That was the whole thing. And they thought, aha, now we've got him. But how many times throughout the scripture, throughout the Gospels, do we read that they thought they had Jesus? They never had Jesus because he gave himself freely. The Pharisees, they looked upon the Sabbath as what I'm not supposed to do, or Jesus, or the Pharisees looked upon the Sabbath as these are the things we're not supposed to do on the Sabbath. But Jesus looked at the Sabbath as what good can I do? The Pharisees chose to observe the rules and traditions, whereas Jesus chose to meet the needs of men. His compassion for those in need superseded everything else. That's it. And his love for us superseded his life because he gave it for us. Sometimes we get caught up in the way we do things. And it's not always right. It's not always wrong. Some things just work that way. But when we truly worship God, we go beyond traditions. It's a one-on-one thing. It can be a group of people who are in one heart and mind to worship God. And that's the way it should be. I don't care if you go by a program every Sunday or what, or you just wing it, ad-lib, whatever. The thing is, it's your heart and your mind that matters at that time of worship. It needs to be in tune and ready to worship God and to receive what he's ready to share with you. So like the Pharisees and the scribes, Jesus went beyond the written program, and he went to the heart of the matter, the need of the person. And as Christians, we are to do the same. We are to try our best to meet the needs of other people, whatever capacity that can be, to whatever capability you have to do. We are to mirror Jesus, to be an example to others of what being a Christian means. And that means caring for people like we would care for ourselves. So a word of prayer. Dear God, I just thank you, and I praise you, dear God, for because you do reign. And dear God, even our world's in a mess, that you are still in control. And dear God, things will get done at your will and your bidding. So dear God, just help us to rely upon you, depend upon you, and to follow your lead, dear God, in our lives, and to care about others like you did. Keep us safe, dear God. Watch over us. And we just give you praise. We love you, Lord. Amen. Next week, we'll be looking at loved, L-O-V-E-D, loved, Luke 7, verses 40 through 50. That's Luke 7, 40 through 50. You have a good week. Stay safe. God bless.